Hello, welcome back to the second part of our talk on technology, quality and ethics. I'm Craig McDonald. In our first talk, part A, we looked at quality, some ideas about what quality is and about how we might go about embedding quality better in the systems that we construct. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about ethics, another aspect, but not too dissimilar, as we'll soon see. Technology, quality and ethics. The little tagline that we've been using is that quality has to do with doing the thing right and ethics has to do with doing the right thing. We've tackled part A and now part B, ethics. Ethics discussions can become quite difficult. Words like good or bad, should or shouldn't, you ought not do something, it's right, it's wrong, can become quite dogmatic and quite embedded in conversations. Here's an example of how that might look. Let's say somebody, a lecturer perhaps, says that plagiarism is unethical. You might say, well, no, it isn't, not unethical. Somebody says, yes, it is. Somebody else, no, it isn't. And you get into this slanging match about, tis so, it is not. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. No, it's not. And that really doesn't get us anywhere except lose a few friends. There's another way of doing this. Try replacing the word is with the phrase can be seen as. For example, plagiarism can be seen as unethical. Now, the response to that isn't, no, it can't. The response is, oh yeah, how did you get to that? And the reason that this works is that can be seen as makes it relevant to a particular way of thinking about plagiarism. It doesn't cement it like the word is does. Is admits of no opposite. It is unethical and that's it. All you can do with that is agree or disagree. But with this, you can start to open up the conversation, unravel that point of view. Why is it seen as being unethical? And you can dig into the ideas. So this is it's not a trick, it's just a neat way of separating out what is an assertion from what is a discussion. In ethics, this is particularly useful, I've got to say. Try replacing is with can be seen as. Now, in part A, we looked at the difference between subjective and objective quality. Subjective quality was that concerned the way you respond to something impersonally, and quality is that objective characteristic that looks at an object, describes it, compares it to a pattern by which we can tell whether it's quality or not, or what degree of quality it has, and come to an objective decision about it. The case with ethics is very similar. If somebody says ethics is unethical, it can be seen as being a subjective statement. That is, it's coming from the heart. I find it to be unethical. That's my experience, and that's the way I'm thinking about it at the moment. Or it can be seen as objective. Namely, it's a general rule. It's the kind of thing which promotes social trust, and it's the kind of thing that's not about self-interest, it's about the interests of the wider community. And these can be seen as being objective values rather than individual values at the time at which the discussion takes place. One way of separating these two is to refer to the first one as morals, the sort of moral position that somebody takes, and the second one as an ethical position. That is, ethics then is cast as being an objective thing, while morals is cast as being a personal subjective thing. There's a bunch of showstoppers that are used by people whenever ethics kinds of conversations start. People disagree on what ethics is, so there's nothing to talk about, it's just personal stuff. Who am I to judge others? You know, I'm in no position to judge. ethics is purely private. Don't bring ethics into this. Got nothing to do with it. Now, these are irrelevant comments because they are all in this category. They are all trying to stop a conversation about what's really important. So we must try and put these aside. We must try and deal with the ethical aspects of the work that we do because it has tremendous impact on others. So in this talk, we'll just look at a few ways about how we can reason about ethics and how we can build it into the work we do. Let's start with a case study, robo-debt. Now, robo-debt is a situation that has arisen in the Australian political and technological scene. I wrote a little article about it for the Information Age a little while ago, a month or two ago, and it has attracted quite a lot of comment from various people. To tune up for the ethics discussion, what I'd really like you to do is to pause this video, read that article, note down how you respond to the article and what you would have said as a response to the article, and then when you're ready, return to this video. Okay, so pause now, return when you're ready. Well, welcome back again. A fairly contentious comment. Quite a lot of commentary there came from either one side, yes, or the other side, no. Hang on. So let's see how we might think about some of these topics. Ethical reasoning. This is one way of thinking about how we consider technology. Here's the idea of technology coming between you as an individual human being with your own thoughts and the physical surroundings that you have around you. You receive stimuli from these surroundings and you act in your surroundings, even if it's only listening and talking. What technology does for us is to amplify the stimulus so that we can see and detect a whole lot more about our world, and it amplifies our actions so that we can operate, for example, at a distance. Take, for example, the telescope or the microscope as a piece of technology which allows the stimulus, the light, coming from the physical surroundings to be amplified so that we can see a whole lot more than we could have seen without the technology. And similarly, the technology of, a mechanical digger, for example. This kind of technology allows us to move a heap of earth a whole lot more quickly than we could do it with our hands. So this is what technology over the last 250 years or perhaps 5,000 years has been doing for individuals. One argument that's been put forward is that, well, really, computing technology only exacerbates the ethical issues that were pre-existing. For example, stalking was something that was done to people. What cyber stalking has done is simply amplify that a little bit by taking the action that was being taken in any case and adding dimensions to it. Identity theft, well, there have always been con men who have stolen identities and misrepresented themselves as somebody else. Crime, terrorism, warfare, and so on. A list of points about exacerbating the same issue, only technology making it worse. Other people have argued that, well, actually, intelligent technology is doing something quite different, and it's introducing a whole set of new technical ethical issues. So the list gets somewhat larger. Now, in this case, this computing technology, intelligent technology, is not just doing this kind of work for us, but it's circumventing the loop. It is detecting the physical surroundings, processing itself, and maybe acting autonomously without any human knowing what's going on there. And this technology has been constructed, perhaps, by human beings, or perhaps it's learning type technology, which makes it genuinely autonomous. So there are some ways of going about this. We could just take these issues one at a time and try and examine them from an ethical perspective, but we would be here for a very long time and the list would never end. Better to try and come up with a set of principles that allow us to examine issues from an ethical perspective and see if we can come to some determinations. So, ethical decision making. You're about to make a decision. You weigh up the pros and cons and you think about whether this act that I'm about to make or system I'm about to build is good for my finances, good for my profile, my social status, or my experience. Might be good for my health, good for my interests. I'm actually interested in doing this. Good for friends, families, and I might have an altruistic view of the act I'm about to take. And this is all perfectly fine. These things are things that we use in our decision making every minute of the day. They are concerning us, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You're responsible for yourself. You must look after yourself. And these things must be taken into account explicitly and deliberately when you're making a decision. If that decision affects others, if we're acting professionally as a professional IT person or engineer, we take on added responsibilities to apply accepted ethical standards and not just these moral ones, as it were. When organisations act, they need to do likewise. Organisations ought not be just acting for their own health and well-being. They should be acting in an ethically acceptable manner. A lot of people, however, argue that they need not do that they can act just for themselves and their shareholders, and that's the only thing they should do. If you look up some papers on shareholder ethics, you'll find this argument being put that only the shareholder matters, and anything an organisation does that doesn't improve shareholder returns shouldn't be done. And nations seem to be similar. There is a feeling that nations should do what's good for themselves and not worry about anything else. And unfortunately, these two views are having deleterious effects on the planet and on humanity. The big question is, what ethical reasoning, what tools have we got to think about topics, issues, in order to come to some ethical position on them? And here are 5. The first one is called consequential ethics. 1, you ought to do X rather than Y because X has good consequences. The utilitarian principle is the first of these, and it says, well, you should choose to do the thing which is the greatest good for the greatest number. So you look for the thing that gives the greatest return, as it were. Now, this has a few problems, but it's a good idea. Some of the problems are, how do you know what the end result's going to be? How do you balance out stakeholders, some who are going to have harm done to them, some who are going to be having good things done for them? There are some difficulties, but a lot has been written about it, and it's a very good rule of thumb. It at least forces you to think about exactly who is going to be affected and in what way. Risk aversion is the other side of the coin of utilitarian, which says, do the thing that produces least harm. So this is called consequential ethics. It's looking at the quality, if you like, of the results of the action or the system in many of our cases. The second way of thinking about ethics is virtue ethics. Virtue ethics just says, look, there are a whole bunch of things that that humankind generally considers to be virtuous and not virtuous, to be vindictive and arrogant, to be mercenary, to be disloyal. These things are considered across almost all societies to be unvirtuous things, and that what we should be doing is just do the right thing, just do the right thing. Now, this too has been criticised on many grounds because it's not based on anything except experience, for example, but it is very, very general across different human cultures that these virtues are held to be valuable. The third line is that there are laws and aspirations that societies have, which they've codified in rules and in conversation, which can guide and in some cases restrict just what we can do. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to which we are a signatory, rights of nations, the Human Rights Commission, we shouldn't be doing things which are discriminatory because these kinds of ethical rules will prohibit that. And many of these have been codified into law, so that there are things which we cannot do by law, risking the penalties that come with it. There's a bunch of technological rules. The Privacy Act is one. The principles, privacy principles, and the GDPR, which is quite a recent but significant set of rules for our computer-based systems which do not follow this regulation will in due course end up in court and costing the owners a heap. And there are lots of other sources of general ethical rules. Laws, the law of contract, for example, is one where if you agree, if you promise to do something, you are bound by this law to do it. Religious teaching, etiquette, clubs and society, the university's rules about various things, these are in our environment. They're all rules and regulations which guide and which can constrain us. And these are all ethical ideas. The fourth means of ethical reasoning is that you ought to do X rather than Y because X is in line with professional standards. Here is the Australian Computer Society's Code of Professional Conduct. And the first one, you'll notice the primary of the public interest. These are only the headlines. If you go to the code on the ACS website, you'll find descriptions of what these actually mean in some detail. Enhancing the quality of life, that means that the utilitarian view of what we do in systems means that it will be the greatest good for the greatest number, and it will do no harm. Honesty, competence, you'll continue to develop your professionalism as technology changes and as your experience develops, and you'll be a well-rounded professional. Here's a link to the code. There's also a set of case studies that we've prepared in the ACS. These look at a whole range of different issues and how those issues work with the code. And from the code's perspective, it says where you might find issues that match each of these different aspects of the code. So a very useful resource. So that's the fourth means of ethical reasoning. And the fifth is passing the pub test. And here are a few rules of thumb, some ethical heuristics. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If you are about to take an act, build a system, and you wouldn't like to be a user of it, then don't build it. Owning up test. Would I be proud to tell my mum or be interviewed on TV? So you as a systems developer are there on the 7:30 report on the ABC, and the interviewer is asking you, why did you build a system that did so much harm? Would you be proud to stand up and say, yes, I did that. That was my excellent code. Yes, it did a whole heap of damage, but that's just the way it is. And then there's this. If you're feeling uncomfortable about something that you're doing, then there's probably a good reason for that, and you should perhaps listen to yourself and give some more thought to what you're on about. Formally speaking, there are a couple of ancient philosophical approaches. If an action is not right for everyone to take, then it's not right for anyone, which try to sort of give an overall feel for what might be right and what might not. And Descartes also had a similar comment. And they add up to, well, what if everyone did it? If everyone built things like this, would the society collapse? And if it would, then you know you're doing the wrong thing because it's not generalizable. Now, there are some restrictions on what is ethical, on when ethics can be seriously important. And the first one is the limits on what we can be responsible for. We can't be responsible if we have no autonomy, if we can't actually make a choice, if we can't actually act on our own, then we have no autonomy. And we can't be said to be unethical if we've got no choice in taking that action. The problem with this is that we've almost always got a choice. So if you're employed and you've been given the task of building a system which you consider to be unethical, leave. Either try and change the way that that system is going to operate and have that internal battle, or leave. You have autonomy as a professional. And foresight is the second of these limits. If you can't predict the consequences, and sometimes we can't, if we get unexpected consequences, then it's doubtful that you can be held fully responsible for that action. And there are some impediments to it. So it's difficult to be responsible for some consequence that arises out of an organisation's act, because often it's not a single person that has taken that decision, it's an act by the organisation. The organisation needs to be responsible for it. The organisation isn't really a moral agent in the same way as you and I are moral agents. So there's a bit of a problem there. But with our governance processes in modern organisations and the laws that surround directorships, directors now take personal responsibility for the harms that their organisations do. Unfortunately, this doesn't apply to ministers in our government. The second kind of impediment to being responsible is that the division of labour means that you might be working on one very small part of a system but be unaware of what the overall system is about. So you can't be held responsible for the overall when you weren't to know what it was all doing. Now, the onus is on you as a professional to have that context awareness that gives you the capacity to be responsible for your actions. To me, this is not a get out of jail card. So if you think back to the Robodebt case, many of the comments relied on one of these two ways of not taking responsibility for what happened with Robodebt. So here's a system which created pain and harm for hundreds of thousands of Australians and has been associated with a number of suicides, but heaps of distress. And despite what the head of that department had to say about it, it is a complicated issue, I must admit. But nonetheless, tremendous harm has been done, and the government has backed right off and is giving back all the money and has made this sort of rough form of apology. Now, that's nowhere near good enough. That system should never have been implemented. The IT people who built that system are responsible for what happened in that system, in my opinion. So these limits and impediments can be used as excuses. Okay, now a process for implementing it. Just as we did when we were talking about the quality argument, we had a number of ways of trying to figure out what the quality metrics were, and then a process for building those quality metrics into every artifact we produce. Exactly the same idea happens here with ethical reasoning. Here is a little process. Figure out what it is you're actually about to do, what the decision is. Apply the consequential ethics. Figure out what the effects are on each stakeholder. Examine the proposal and see what its impacts are going to be. Figure out whether it's virtuous, whether it's legal, and whether it meets society's aspirations and standards. Figure out whether or not you, by working on it, are adhering to professional standards. And ask yourself the questions about the pub test. Is it going to be okay for me to do this? And you can use an ethics canvas as a way of representing your thinking about this. This is what a canvas might look like. Here we've got a bunch of stakeholders to do that consequential ethics, thinking about those. Think about, well, what kind of standards does society expect? And here's the physical environment. The society expects us not to burn heaps of power and to produce heaps of waste. So does it do that? And society has these laws about data protection. So does this developer take those on? What are the virtues? Is it transparent? Is it clear what's actually going on within this system? Can the owner say for sure what the system does so that they can take responsibility for that? Professional standards, and here's the pub test, potential for misuse, the ACS code, and other kinds of things that you might be taking into account. So here are our various ways of addressing it. And here are a whole heap of things, points that say, yes, we've considered these different approaches. And how can we improve proposal X in order to take them into account? So that's a rough ethics canvas. And if you'd like to try it out, the ACS case studies are there for you to have a look at individual cases. Instead of just reacting to them and saying yeah or no, you can build up this canvas. You can see what's happening within that case by the various means of reasoning that we've talked about. Better yet, choose a project at work and just spend a quarter of an hour thinking about the ethical arguments around this case and see what it reveals. Sometimes it can be quite an eye-opener. Here's an example just drawn from the web of a sample ethics canvas. And to bring all this to conclusion, ethics can be seen as complicated. There's a little paper in the resources to back this up. It's mixed up with a whole lot of other different sorts of values, aesthetic values, for example, which is our response to whether or not something is beautiful, whether it feels nice in the hand, whether it's pleasing to the eye. Political values, how it works with politics, the economic values, thinking about dollars and cents, social values, all of these value sets have their own individual ideas, but they're basically all swept up with ethics. Ethics is about values, and these are simply different kinds of values. But we do have these ethical criteria, and we do have ways of thinking about ethics, and we do have the canvas as a way of specifying or documenting our thoughts about a particular case, and these can help you. And there's a little tagline: why wouldn't you do the right thing? So my argument is that we need an ethics canvas on every systems project, and it should be referred to regularly and should be known by all of the project team to ensure that they are building within that ethical framework, just like an EIS. So now, let's bring together the two threads of this talk, quality and the ethics. Ethics too often is seen as totally separate from technology practice, just something out there. For it to have power, we've got to integrate it. Quality is generally, except for some of my friends, is generally a recognised part of the system development process. But quality is sometimes treated very lightly and rather arbitrarily. So let's bring them together. Let's use quality as a way to embed ethics thinking in systems development. I've argued that every artifact needs to have its own quality pattern. So now ethical reasoning, being the basis of stakeholder management in the PR system, brings ethics into that whole argument about quality. Explicit quality and ethics should be our business as usual in professional work, not just something that's tacked on afterwards. It's got to be there at the beginning, it's got to be referred to as development occurs, and it's got to be there reviewed at the end. It's an integral part of doing professional work and being professional. Ethics can help us in the development of our quality patterns. It gives us a whole set of tools there, ways of thinking. And I've noted that quality and ethics are very similar in their concept and in their approach. And here are the two patterns that we've used to try and capture our thinking: ethics canvas to assess the ethics of the system, and the quality pattern that builds all of this into each artifact. Doing this will generate ethical systems, and systems that we can demonstrate are ethical. So why wouldn't you do the right thing? And why wouldn't you do the thing right? So thank you very much for listening to this talk, and I'm interested to have a chat with you when the discussion forum opens, and to respond to any of the points you would like to make on the bulletin board discussion forum. Wonderful. Well, thanks again.